This psychoanalytical approach to literature, this forms a base of almost all the theories, or all of almost the entire literature, right? So, of all the critical approaches to literature, this has been one of the most controversial, the most abused, and for many readers, the least appreciated also. Now, yet for all the difficulties involved in its proper application to interpretative analysis, the psychological approach can be fascinating as well as rewarding also, right? So, what we are going to discuss, it's in your syllabus, it's Lionel Trilling's essay, Freud and Psychoanalysis, right? So, we will discuss this essay with reference to this essay. We will discuss the psychoanalytical approach to literature. Now, it is an axiomatic that no single approach can exhaust the manifold interpretative possibilities of a literary work. If we want to understand a literary work, we cannot limit ourselves to any one approach, right? So, the crucial limitation of the psychological interpretation can afford many profound clues towards solving a work's thematic as well as symbolic mysteries, but it can seldom account for the beautiful symmetry of a well wrought poem or a fictional masterpiece. Now, the psychological approach, it is basically an excellent tool for reading beneath the lines, for reading the meanings which are otherwise not spoken out clearly, right? So, through psychological approach, what we do, we read beneath the lines. We read what is written in the lines instead of what is said straightway. So, the interpretative craftsman must often use other tools for a proper rendering of lines themselves. So, in the general sense of the word, there is nothing new about psychological approach. As early as the 4th century BC, that is Aristotle, in the times of Aristotle, Aristotle used in setting forth his classical definition of tragedy that we had read earlier, as combining the emotions of pity and terror to produce catharsis. This we had read uh, in our previous semester, that was Aristotle's Poetics. So he defined tragedy as a combination of the emotions of pity and terror so as to produce catharsis. So the complete gentleman of the English Renaissance after Aristotle, Sir Philip Sidney, he also highlights the importance of psychological reading of the literature with his statement about the moral effects of poetry and psychologizing literature, as where such romantic poets, besides Philip Sidney, romantic poets like Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Shelley, with their theories of imagination. So these are the few critics: Aristotle, Sir Philip Sidney, as well as Coleridge and Wordsworth and Shelley. They have already pointed out or already have highlighted the importance of understanding the psychology of writing or psychological response to literature. So during the 20th century, however, the psychological criticism has come to be associated with a particular school of thought, that is the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud. So now, when we talk about psychoanalytical theory, it is straightway associated with Sigmund Freud and his followers. So the foundation of Freud's contribution to modern psychology is his emphasis on the unconscious aspect of the human psyche. I had shared a small video lecture on the basics of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytical approach, how he explains the unconscious aspect of the human psyche. I hope you must have seen that video. So, a brilliant creative genius, Freud, he provided a very convincing evidence through his many carefully recorded case studies that most of our actions are motivated by psychological forces over which we have very limited control. And how he explained this concept, he demonstrated that like the iceberg, the human mind is structured so that its great weight and density lies beneath. Here's the graphic representation of what Freud said. So the great weight and density lie beneath the surface, below the level of unconscious. In the Anatomy of Mental Personality, in his book, The Anatomy of the Mental Personality, Freud discriminates between the levels of conscious and unconscious mental activity. So, what he says, the oldest and best meaning of the word unconscious is the descriptive one. We call unconscious, what is basically unconscious? Any mental process, the existence of which we are obligated to assume because, for instance, we infer it in some ways from its effect, but of which we are not directly aware. We have a kind of intuition, we know something, but we are not aware about it, that these are the things that are affecting our personality. So if you want to be more accurate, we should modify the statement by saying that we call a process unconscious when we have to assume that it was active at a certain time. So that feeling, that emotion that was active at a particular time, although at that time we knew nothing about it. So if we go through this structure that he has given us, you see at the unconscious level what we have selfish needs, raw aggression, immoral urges, irrational wishes, animalistic sexual drives, socially unacceptable sexual drives, and shameful experiences. And all these, they form a part of our personality, that is it. We have three parts in our personality: it, ego, and superego. What we are actual, what we show to other is ego, and what we normally hide from the people, that is it, you know? That is a kind of negative aspect of our personality. And what is superego? Superego is that part of our personality in which we are more charitable, we are more spiritual, we are more good kind of person, right? So a normal person or a balanced person is the one who can maintain a balance between the conflict that arises between superego and it, right? We are not supposed to become a criminal. On the other hand, we are also not supposed to go सन्यासी, है ना? बिल्कुल ही अपा ऐनी कि सारा कुछ छड़ छड़ा के रब वाल ही लग जाना है या सारा कुछ छड़ छड़ा के ऐसे criminal बन जाना है. What we do is that we need to maintain our personality at a level which is ego. Now see, through this graphic representation, ego forms a part where we have conscious level. There we have needs, we have thoughts, we have perceptions, and we have emotions. Clear? And at pre-conscious level, what we have memories of our experiences, we have knowledge, and we also know about what is ongoing but unattended to need. We need something, but it's not so urgent that we want to fulfill it right now, right? Then we have our feelings, our thoughts, our problems. All these lie in pre-conscious level. This is not something unconscious, this is pre-conscious. We are aware about it, but we snub it, we keep it at a hidden level, right? Then we have unconscious level, about the things which we are not aware of. They lie in our personality, but normally we are not aware of that. If we have fought with somebody, very many times we realize now that we have fought unnecessarily, right? So why we fought or why we did anything unnecessarily, it is because of the emotions or the desires or the need or aggression that lies at our unconscious level. And our dreams that we see when we sleep, they are a reflection of unconscious level. Now Sigmund Freud, another very important concept of Sigmund Freud is of dreams, right? That's not in, basically discussed in this chapter, in this essay, but I think we need to analyze what Sigmund Freud mean by giving a full-fledged analysis of dreams, because dreams are basically they are the reflection of our unconscious personality. Am I clear? Am I clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Right.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So, what we have discussed that Freud he gave three major concepts. I want to do that now. What does it says? It says I want it right now, right? And superego, it's not right to do that. Superego will stop us from performing any kind of activity that may hurt somebody else. Clear? And what ego says? Ego is a combination, or ego is a balance of these two aspects of personality, it and superego. And ego says maybe we can compromise. So normally our personality is the result of compromises that we make in our life, and that's very, very important for a balanced person to maintain this compromise. So, what is the main aim of the talk, Lenin, that we are going to discuss in this lecture? Number one, to understand Trilling's views about point one, Freud's influence on literature. Why we are studying a theory which is not basically which is not basically a product of literature. It is basically a product of psychology. Now, what we need to understand is that how Freud influenced literature and its importance in literature. On the other hand, influence of literature on Freud as a psychoanalytic critic. Now, why does Freud thought it necessary to compare these two different aspects, or compare these two different disciplines, that is psychology and literature? So this we will understand from our study of Trilling's essay. Second aim is to understand the possibilities as well as limitations of psychoanalytical approach to literature. When we are reading a literary text from a psychological approach, are we somehow demeaning the importance of literature, or we are enhancing the importance of literature? So this is what we need to understand. Third point is to analyze if psychoanalysis gives valid interpretation to literary text or not. Is it correct to read a literary text from psychoanalytical approach? Yeah. So this we have discussed Freud's id, ego, and superego. Then what is Freud's iceberg structure? Now, what is Freud's psychoanalysis? What does it say? Well, Freud's psychoanalysis is a systematic study of the deep and dark mysteries of human mind. And what we have recently we have discussed is that he gave a very important concept, that is of unconscious. So that is why Freud is basically known as discoverer of unconscious. Now, Freud, when he was called, it was on his 70th birthday that one of his admirers, he complimented him as the discoverer of unconscious. And what Freud replied to it is that the poets and philosophers had already ventured to explore the dark mysteries of human mind. What he said, that this is not what I have done. Right? So here he acknowledges the influence of literature on his study or on his theory of psychoanalysis. What he said, that before him, the other poets and the philosophers, they have already ventured to explore the dark and deep mysteries of human mind through their literary works. What he did is, if I quote him, what he says, what I did was to make a scientific and systematic study of the unconscious. So what he did, he got influenced from the description of human mind in the literary works. Then he explored it through a scientific way, that how our minds reacts, or how our mind explores the things when it study literature. Well, after World War II, I here add example how literature can affect the mind of a person. After World War II, many of the soldiers, they were made to see the movies that were made on the war aspect, or they were made to study or listen to the literature which explored these war writings. Now, why it was done? It was done to make them empathize with the condition of the literary text. It was make them to see the experiences that were haunting them, that were disturbing them, and then that experiences led to the purgation of their emotion, right? So it was like a purgation of the pathos were generated in them, and then it led to purgation. And once emotions are purgated, when you are free of the mind, you feel calm. And this is how the soldiers of World War One were treated by through their psychoanalytical approach. So indeed, thinkers like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, these are the German philosopher, and poets like William Blake, he's an English poet. They had thought and written about the mysterious working of human mind. Moreover, one of the chief features of romantic movement was an exploration of self. So when we talk about psychoanalysis, the concept of self is very important. What am I? Right? I am something different for myself at one point. I can be different at another point, right? What I think about myself will never ever be equal to what the other person will think of me. So this concept of self is itself a very problematic concept. Now, how the other person look at you, how you look at yourself, and how you want to represent yourself, and how you want yourself to be seen. So there are four parts of yourself. One, what you see yourself. Second, how you want to see yourself. Third, how you project yourself. And fourth, how the other person perceives your personality. So coming back to romanticism. So romantic movement, one of the chief feature of romantic movement was an exploration of self and the interest in the remote and the unknown. Right? What we had studied in romantic poetry was that what romantics tried to explore, they don't. One thing is that romanticism is not about love, right? About a love between a lover and a beloved, right? It is a love for something unseen. It is a love for nature. It is a love for something remote, which is beyond your own reach. So here, the psychoanalysis approach seems to be a culmination of romanticism, which explores the self, which is not known to us, and the interest in the remote and the unknown. So Freudian researchers in fact reached the culmination of romantic interest in the self. Now, drilling further, he discusses Freud's views of literature and the consequent influence of Freudian's study on creative writing, literature, right, as well as on literary criticism. Now, Freud's views on art and literature, they are paradoxical. How they are paradoxical? On the one hand, he admits his indebtedness to the poets and philosophers. He believed, he said, he confirmed that he was influenced by the poets and the philosophers, and how they had accumulated lot of insights into the working of human mind. But on the other hand, he dismissed art as a kind of neurosis. What he called art, that it is a kind of neurosis. According to him, an artist is a neurotic who lives in a world of illusion. As he creates his own fictional reality, his created reality is in fact a distortion of reality. So what is an artist? He is basically a neurotic who does not live in a real world. Artist lives in a world which is beyond this reality, which is a kind of fiction, which is a kind of utopia. It can be a utopia, it can be a dystopia, right? So it depends the kind of imagination of the artist. So the artist, he create a fictional reality. Now what is a fictional? This is now paradoxical. On the one hand, it is fictional. On the other, it is reality. Now how it is a fictional reality? Because it is a kind of distorted reality. It is a reality of that artist himself, which he created by excluding the things that he don't want in his life, that he don't want around himself, and he created those fictionalized characters, those fictionalized situations which he otherwise want in his life or otherwise want around himself. So in his essay, creative writing, a daydreaming, creative writing and daydreaming, Freud called art as a substitute gratification. So what is substitute gratification? That we attain a kind of satisfaction by substituting our reality and by creating a fictional world. So we, in a way, escape from our reality when we study a novel, when we read a novel. What we are doing, we are transposed to another world, and we substitute our real world to that fictionalized world. We reach there, we get surrounded by the characters, we feel ourselves a part of that story, and that is how we gratify ourselves, that is how we satisfy ourselves and keep ourselves away from the problems and other things that disturb us in reality. So this is a kind of therapeutic value of art. Now, what he want to say about what he mean by substitute gratification, the basic function of this substitute gratification is that it is a kind of therapy which helps you to leave aside your problems, to leave aside your the current situation, and calm your mind in a kind of fictional world. So, but later on, Freud, however, changed his views regarding the value of art and literature. He realizes that art has a therapeutic value both for the artist as well as the viewer, or the reader and the writer and the reader. So we can quote numerous examples of this value of art. We find the purging of emotional blocks in confessional poetry or even autobiographical novels, such as you have read D.H. Lawrence, Sons and Lovers, right? So the kind of the things that Lawrence explored in that novel, Sons and Lovers, through his concept of Oedipus complex. Oedipus complex was basically given by Sigmund Freud, that D.H. Lawrence explored in his novel. So as well as it also helps the release of the emotions of pity and fear among the spectator as they watch a tragic drama, and shows that art has a cathartic effect. You must have noticed when we watch some movie or when we watch some serial, right, we somehow feel a fear for that character. Sometimes we cry, sometimes we get happy over the achievement of that characters. There we are somehow equating ourselves with that character, and we are feeling on the behalf of that character. If that character is happy, we are happy. If the person or the character is crying on the screen, we cry ourselves. What is that? That is a cathartic effect. And that cathartic, through that cathartic effect, there is a purgation of emotions that otherwise was disturbing us. So it is a kind of fictional escape. Now, Freudian psychotherapy is a scientific method for curing neurosis, while for a psychiatrist, psychotherapy is pure effective. According to Freud, art and literature, they both provide fictional escape. So either it is a psychological therapy, or it is of reading of literature or watching a movie that has a therapeutic effect on the mind of the viewer or the reader. Now, the most important question raised in this essay is the application of psychoanalysis to literature. Freud He was aware of the limitations of the application of psychoanalysis to art and literature, and he even dismissed the thought of sitting in judgment to literature. He knows that we cannot judge a literature or a literary aspect on the basis of only and only psychoanalysis theory. No text, no person can be judged on the basis of any one thought. If we judge the text or person on any one thought, we will fail in understanding the concept as a whole. So this is what Freud was very much aware, and he knows that the psychoanalysis theory will have its limitation when we apply it to art or literature. He had basically no inclination to encroach upon the autonomy of the artist. So what he insisted that neither the psychiatrist can yield to the author nor the author to the psychiatrist, right? So yet it can be asserted that psychoanalysis provides a tool for interpretation and understanding of literature in two ways. Now, what are those two ways? Number one, by explaining the inner meaning of a literary work, and number two, by explaining the temperament of the artist. So Freud made some application of his theory to the interpretation of literature, and these are the basic texts that he had discussed in his Trilling has discussed in his essay. His study of King Lear, Shakespeare's one of the greatest play, King Lear, it is a deep study of the mind of Lear. In the person of King Lear, Freud finds a character who makes a tragic refusal to renounce love, chooses death, and makes friend with the necessity of dying. So the character of the three daughters of Lear also are shown to be the manifestation of his unconscious. But more than Freud, it was his follower Ernest Jones who made a first full-scale psychoanalytic study of major literary works in English, and Ernest Jones' study, a psychoanalytical study of Shakespeare's Hamlet, although created a lot of controversy, yet it has become a casebook example, right? So what Ernest Jones finds in Hamlet, that Hamlet was a psycho-neurotic person who suffers from mania and depression. He suffers from mania due to Oedipal tendency. He was very much connected with his mother, and he could not bear either his father, King Hamlet, or afterwards his stepfather, the next king, to be close to his mother. So basically, Hamlet had a mania to Oedipal tendency. He finds in Hamlet a manifestation of Shakespeare's personal fixation also. So although this is how Ernest Jones reads Hamlet. So although post-Freudian critics will dismiss Jones' study as obsolete, yet it still is the most single important study of literature. Then Mary Bonaparte, another Freudian psychoanalyst, has made a study of the work of American writers like Henry James, Mark Twain, and Nathan Harrington, and many more. So Trilling, however, access the inadequacies of psychoanalytical approach to literature. So this is what we had discussed, how the psychoanalytical approach can be applied, right? It was applied to Shakespeare, King Lear, Hamlet, then many works of Henry James, Mark Twain, Nathan Harrington. We can also study D.H. Lawrence text from the psychoanalytical approach and many more. However, there are certain limitations that Trilling has discussed in his essay, and what he says. Number one, the concern of the critic is to find artistic meaning rather than the intention of the artist. So what he says, this is not a work of a critic to find out what is the intention of the artist. The concern of the critic is to find artistic meaning, right? So when we need to find artistic meaning, then we need to understand that the aesthetics are much more important than the inner meaning, or than the finding the meanings that is not being said by the artist straightway. So literary work has aesthetic meaning also other than the inner meaning. And the meaning of a work of literature is changeable. If we are reading a text, if we are reading a poem, it may have a different appeal to me. It may have different appeal to Jagdeep. It may have different appeal to Manit and to other students also. We may find many meanings from one literary text. So the meaning of the work of literature is changeable, subject to various interpretation. And this deviation, why it comes because when we study it in the context of socio-historical aspect, the meaning will definitely change. Even if there is some conscious intention of the author, there may be some unconscious intentions also, and it is not easy to explain this kind of intention. So this is a major limitation of psychoanalysis or psychoanalytical approach to literature. Now, the second point, an important point that is considered as a limitation of psychoanalysis, that we had discussed the concept of dream given by Sigmund Freud. So psychoanalysis is based on the study of dream images. Now, Freudian approach requires dream analysis of symbols and myths. But until and unless there is a free association of the dreamer with the multiple details, analysis is not possible. Because dream is a kind of thing which cannot be understand or which cannot be remembered at the whole, right? What we will remember is only those parts which will remain in a conscious level, because dream is a reflection of unconscious aspect of the mind. So when we wake up, we are again into our conscious level, and those things that were reflected in dream, they will again slip back to pre-conscious or unconscious level. So to study a dream image is not possible. Now, formalistic critics, they find that a work of art is an entity in itself. For example, a poem is a being in itself. Its meaning is to be found in its language and the context in which this verbal or linguistic expression is used. Hence, literary appreciation has nothing to do with the biography of the author. So, if it has nothing to do with the biography of the author, the psychoanalysis of the literary text fails to give the socio-historical aspect or time to which he belongs, because the meaning of literary work is what comes out of the text itself. So the critic is basically concerned with the language of the text, not the language of the author, not the intentions of the author. Then another limitation, psychoanalysis is much abused on account of excess of enthusiasm. It is believed that the psychoanalysis is something which is over enthusiastic. This undue enthusiasm shows itself in many ways. Number one, the practitioner of Freudian approach often push their critical theory too hard, even at the cost of other relevant consideration, like a literary works total thematic and aesthetic concept. This is what we have discussed earlier also, that when we apply psychoanalysis on a literary aspect, on a literary text, then we are analyzing a text at the cost of other relevant considerations, such as Marxism, a Marxist aspect. It can be economic, it can be anything, right? So we are somehow demeaning the other aspects of the literary text. Number two, degenerated into a special occultism. The literary criticism of psychoanalyst extremists has degenerated into a special occultism, that is mystery. Right? Then many critics of psychoanalytical approach have been literary scholars who have understood the principles of psychology imperfectly. As a result, they have observed as De Morgan and obscenes from Freudian insight, though oversimplification and distortion. So basically, the theory, it oversimplifies and distorts the other things that have been meant in the text. So there are also some psychoanalytical critics who are professional and they have little feeling for lot as an act. They offend the sensibilities of the reader. Hence, traditional critic, they reject all psychoanalytical criticism as pretentious nonsense. So this is what Trilling says. These are the major limitations that Trilling has pointed out in his essay, Freud and Psychoanalysis. Coming to the next one. Now, Freud's theory of the unconscious, with its emphasis upon libido, was questioned by his followers even. It was followed by C.J. Jung. What he says, Jung says, he discovered another force governing the unconscious mental process. So this force is called myth, which he calls collective unconscious of a race, and which was one of the influencing factor for archetypal approach to literature. This archetypal approach moves from psychology to anthropology and literary anthropology. So this is how Jung objected to Freud's theory of psychoanalysis, and he says, and he believes that there are many forces. There are, for example, myth. These are the forces which can govern the unconscious mental process. Then psychoanalysis, what Trilling says, is only a background approach. So literary work is no doubt the intention of an author. He doesn't totally reject that the intention of the author is not important. So what he says, that literary work is no doubt the intention of an author finding a verbal expression with the purpose of communicating to the reader. Now, new critics or formalistic critics, they would separate a literary work from the intention of an artist and they try to find the meaning out of its total verbal structure, what the text says. Hence, for them, it is not the author, but the text that speaks for itself. So, D.H. Lawrence, he says, believe the tale, not the author. A very important, a very well-known statement by D.H. Lawrence. He says, believe the tale, not the author. So this is another limitation of psychoanalysis. Then the last or another important crucial limitation of psychoanalytical approach is its aesthetic inadequacy. It can no doubt afford many deep clues towards solving the thematic and symbolic mysteries of the work, but it can seldom account for the beautiful symmetry of a well-structured poem or a drama or a novel. So in fact, literary interpretation, these are the limitations of psychoanalysis. So literary interpretation and psychoanalysis are two distinct fields, although they are closely associated, yet they cannot be regarded as a part of the same disciplines. This is how Lionel Trilling, he concludes his essay. Here John Willingham, a writer, his quote is important. What he says, the literary critic who views the masterpiece through the lens of Freud is liable to look at art through a glass darkly. So when we study a literary text from the psychoanalytical approach, we are looking through a dark glass from which we can see only one aspect, and we somehow disregard or somehow exclude the other important factors of that text. However, it would be a partial judgment of if we dismiss psychoanalytical approach as useless or a more neurotic nonsense. So some literary interpretations by psychoanalytical critics are based upon psychological insights derived from and exposed by actual case history, and they are set forth in search works with remarkable clarity. So there are, if we accept the basic premises of psychoanalysis and which we cannot easily reject. So psychoanalysis, if we see its influence on the works of, upon the modern writers, on the works of such creative artists as James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, Neil, Philip Roth, just to mention a few. Then more than that is the impact of psychoanalysis upon literary criticism also, as we can find in the essays of such diverse critics like Edmund Wilson, Trilling, Lionel Trilling, that we are studying. F.L. Lucas, Frederick Hoffman, Sandra Gilbert, and Julia Kristeva, just to name a few, right? So we can conclude with the observation of M.H. Abrahams. What he says that no single critical approach is complete in itself. In his essay, Orientation of Critical Theories, what he emphasizes a synthesis of various approaches for the proper understanding and appreciation of literature. So if we want to understand any literary text, what we need to do is to understand it to have a multidisciplinary approach to understand it from the aspect of various literary theories and not only just a one theory. So this is how Lionel Trilling he explained the influence of Freud's psychoanalysis on literature and the influence of literature on Sigmund Freud, and what are the limitations, what are the possibilities, on which area we can apply a psychoanalytical theory to literature, and what are the limitations if we apply only psychoanalytical approach to literature. So I hope all the whatever we have discussed have been clear to you. In case it's not clear, you may text me, you may ask me, or it should be clear to you, right? So that's all.